from the AI Applied Consortium. So today I have Martin Gonzalez with me. And just for those of you who haven't heard this podcast before, or those of you that are interested in kind of gaining what exactly we're going to do today, part of what I want to achieve with this podcast as a whole is to just gain interest from different communities that are looking at artificial intelligence, looking to break barriers of artificial intelligence. And we're going to have a variety of different speakers. You kind of heard, if you're following the first speaker, which was Jung-Woo Ryu, the Chancellor of Penn State. And that lens was very much an academic lens, and we're going to try to shift those lenses, shift the topics, shift kind of the feel for the discussion. I'm going to try to do my best as an amateur podcaster to keep things interesting. And at the end of the day, hopefully you'll like it, or you'll know what not to watch, I suppose. So I want to introduce Martin Gonzalez and give him a chance to kind of talk to us a little bit first about, who he is, both as it relates to the consortium and his professional career, to level set the discussion a little bit. And then we're going to go through a couple of different topics around bringing artificial intelligence to the field, to these kind of ways in which it can augment decision making. And we want to keep things, I guess, fluid, light. So we will hopefully achieve that and keep your attention for the full, officially hour, but maybe, we'll run shorter or later, I suppose. It depends on how quickly we get through these topics. So Martin, thank you for joining us today. And maybe we can start with a little introduction, and then I can follow for those of you that don't know me, who I am. But let's go with you first, Martin.
Yeah. Thank you, Konrad. I guess I'm going to try and do my best as an amateur podcast guest for everybody. But I work for BP. I'm an innovation and technology principal. So as you said, what I've been working on is trying to bring AI into the field to help people make decisions and actually move past the decision making. What we're going to talk a little bit about today is how you decide what intervention to make once you have that decision made. So there's several steps along the way that we're going to talk about. As far as my career, I've been doing digital projects for it's going on 9 years. Some overlap with my work before that, because I am a chemical engineer, and I started with it was actually Amoco Oil Company back then, almost 30 years ago. I'll hit my 30-year anniversary this year. I started off as a researcher because I had done catalysis research in the field. So I was looking at materials, catalyst materials to make fuels, upgrade octane, take the sulfur out of diesel. And I deviated from that, but I came back to that a few times, got into renewable processing a little bit. So that's three things that I've done in my career, right? The digital aspect, and then the research and the pilot plant work, physical work in labs. And then the third thing that I've done is actually tech support for refineries. And this took me into the plants for 16 years at a couple of refineries. And what I saw there really influenced my thinking about the way AI should be deployed. But as a young process engineer, and then eventually a team leader and superintendent, I got to work turnarounds out in the field, got a lot of capital projects, process safety, environmental compliance, lots of optimization. I even worked as a board operator for a while. And I saw the same types of patterns every type of job that I worked, that sort of formed my ideas about what an AI would look like that would help people to make decisions in the field. Not just make decisions, but provide the confidence to get right into action. So that's what I'm hoping we'll talk about today.
Also a trustee to the AI Applied Consortium and an advisor to the Energy Utility Council. I'm going to do your plug for you, Marty.
Thank you for mentioning that.
And I know you're humble, but I do recall you having a PhD in chemistry, right? Is that correct?
In chemical engineering, yeah.
Chemical engineering, that's right.
So I put in those extra 5 years in school just because.
Because I know you well, I will not call you doctor unless you ask me to call you doctor.
You can call me Marty. Anybody online, just call me Marty.
All right, good. So yeah, and I think you bring a lot of that kind of nuanced expertise to some of your approach to like the complex processes that are involved in refining and so on. So I've heard a lot of you. I heard a lot about that from you, right? Kind of learning from the core roots of process engineering or processes of the industry, and then working them into ways in which we can apply AI. So before we continue, I think let's talk a little bit about the art of the possible here, right? Like we're trying to present um, artificial intelligence as a solution for problems that exist in this industry. And I think, and I've heard this time and again, um, people are saturated. This is me going off rails, by the way. We didn't rehearse this morning. People are saturated with the noise behind this technology, I think, to some extent, right? So they're hearing a lot of around large language model, generative AI. And I feel like still, especially in the energy utility space, there is, I think, a lack of understanding of the potential. I think there's a lack of velocity to move as quickly as the technology moves, and that's just inherent in this industry, energy and utilities. And we don't have to talk just about energy utilities, but you have the background, so I'm referring to that. And I've heard audiences kind of state their own challenges and barriers, and when I hear that, and I won't quote anyone specifically, but it's almost like the audience is 3 steps back in what they need to be doing in order to achieve what is achievable today with artificial intelligence. So that was a long-winded way of setting you up for kind of maybe starting us off with how do we approach an industry that is not AI mature effectively. And maybe this speaks to addressing key problems, but also what other lenses in which we can communicate that sort of credibility behind artificial intelligence that actually drives adoption.
Right. So the advent of Gen AI and large language models really did us a big favor in a couple of ways, right? And this was what, fall of 2022, if we can think back that far, seems like a long time ago. But the most important thing it did, I think, was build sort of a thirst for AI or some credibility. So those of us who are already kind of working in the field and trying to get people excited about it, kind of showed people the art of the possible. What is real? What can you do? But more tangibly, it enabled a way where people could go into their documents, into the knowledge that's been historized, and bring it out in an easier way. If you have, handbooks of what you learned that are thousands of pages long, you're not going to take the time to read them all. And you probably don't have the experts around who know everything that's in it. But your LLM can go in and push those insights to you. And the thing is that in a safety critical area like refining and some other areas, because the LLMs hallucinate a little bit, they're not going to be the complete answer. And there's always going to be some reluctance. It's still a little bit too much of a black box. We still tend to be very careful in these industries for how we adopt it. So how do you use that technology that's able to go back and find knowledge and find insights for you and bring it into life in a way that you trust it, right? I think that's been the problem for the last couple of years with Gen AI. What I really like about the large language models is more the reasoning aspect. You're starting to see this become explicit now, like in the DeepSeek model, where you can have the LLM sort of tell you line by line, this is what I'm thinking. Solve a problem the way your teenager would with a math problem in high school. That sort of a thing. And if you kind of look behind the hood, really what the large language model is doing through its process of chopping up the text into tokens and kind of finding these patterns in these different documents is creating a vector space, right? A multi-dimensional space where concepts that are similar lie next to each other. And that I think is really useful, because now you can take those relationships and you can use that for other purposes, turn that into other models, have a human look at that. I've seen some studies where people have gone into the middle of one of these large language models, looked at that middle layer and say, oh, this is where it's mapping information about animals, for example. All the cats and dogs are over in this area. That's a little bit of a simplistic example, but I think that's probably one of the things that's really going to help us make a breakthrough into this area, because we need to provide the trust in the data, which for our industry really comes from a person. We still rely on experience. We still want to have that accountability. We want to know that somebody has vetted the information that we use. and we want a person in the decision-making loop. And gradually, I think as we sort of gain confidence in the AI, where we can prove that it's not hallucinating, at least not in a way, not in any of these safety critical areas, then I think we can take it to the next level and gradually start to automate more and have more of the automated reasoning, some of the, the agency. We hear a lot about agents these days. I think that will enable a lot of that. In the meantime, there's going to be sort of some experimentation, some small inroads. We've started to see where it's almost like statistical process control is coming into the modern world, where we want to see the individual variables. We like thinking about these control ranges for the transparency, but that's not enough. We do need a more complex way to generate insights, to push insights to the user, and that's what AI can do.
So Marty, you inadvertently are plugging episode 4, which we're going to break out into agentic frameworks and how large language models can be like truly maximized in terms of the potential of extracting data using agentic tooling, memory updates, self-learning, all that stuff. So, but I actually what I was hoping to lead you down the path of, and I'll just kind of lead you down the path right now, if that's okay, is like I believe part of why you are and your organization, and they're not hand in hand, but you obviously work for them, so digitally mature, is because you have a much richer understanding of the grassroots of the problems. So you mentioned that you worked at a plant for more than a decade. It was like 16 years. Is that right?
16 years in 2 plants, yeah.
16, right. So I think, like, again, I'm just trying to think an audience from an energy utilities industry that hasn't taken this dive, there could be gaps in their technological understanding, which is fine, because not everyone understands this technology, and I don't pretend to understand all of it either, I guess, right? So that is a challenge that has to be overcome. But then there's maybe the disconnect between trying to find the problem to match the solution. And I think like a lot of what you brought from that process engineering space to the digital space, I believe was a factor in you being able to identify all these relevant use cases. So I guess maybe the question is like, how did that help connect the dots for you and what was done with those dots? How did we draw the picture that is AI for you, right? Like what sort of use cases? And we can maybe start with just how did that help you?
Yeah, so it's I think my thinking really started to develop when I started collaborating with the folks in the upstream. Now, more recently, as we've reorganized, we don't have upstream and downstream anymore. So I have had the luxury of working on production problems as well, even a little bit of the new energy. But the approach that was taken in that part of the company was much more, and I think this is again common of that industry, normal behavior modeling. And you have sort of these alerts that go up when something looks off normal. And that's very much a black box approach, because now that you get the alert, you have the issue of, okay, what comes next? How do we interpret that? Meanwhile, the stuff that I have been working on was very sort of knowledge based, as I mentioned. It's like, gee, we got those handbooks that I mentioned, or the experts. It's like we've got to capture what's in their brains and make it into this model, and it sort of becomes very heavy, very difficult to create these models that way, and it takes a long time. The answer, I believe, is somewhere in the middle. So now that we've matured, and everybody's got to look at these models that you can create from pure machine learning, I think we're starting to see the components come into place, and these are starting to saturate. So if I have some mechanism from alerting that, it could be a black box because that's simple, or even these other types of alerts, rules based, based on thresholds. When that alert comes up, now we want the next aspect with it, which is explainability, right? And I see a lot of offers, a lot of companies, a lot of startups starting to dive into that. How do you provide the explainability? How do I pick apart the alert so that I understand it more? And that's a necessary component. The data availability has made a big difference. And for example, I was a digital twin product owner for a few years for a digital twin program. And what the twin really is about is bringing all the data together about your asset, whether it's a maintenance history or design information, 3D view, or the process data, the sensors, temperatures, pressures, flows. It's all in one place for you to be able to get it. So now that we have different parts of the organization saying, hey, all my data can sit in one place, I no longer have to dig in that file cabinet and look for that drawing that might have a stain on it, right? I could pull it up on my desktop. That's really enabled the use of data and the interlinking of data and using it in different ways. That
Is
combined
that
with the draw. Go ahead.
is that a factor? I mean, again, it's a factor
Yeah.
of digitization coupled with advanced telemetry, coupled with modern data stack, and the integration of IT and OT data stacks together in a more seamless way. Like essentially, what is the
Yeah.
drivers behind that? Like what and maybe the lead in question too is like you're kind of saying what I was going to ask, which
Mhm.
is why is this possible today,
Yeah.
and why wasn't it possible? And you did allude to the
Mhm.
accessibility of the data,
Right.
right? But that downstream, I suppose, has a lot of um, factors that allow for data accessibility. And I wonder, like, if an audience member is listening,
Mhm.
I'm not pretending to know what they're thinking, not yet, at least, not until we get that AI that we're working in the basement to read people's minds, right? That they want to know relative to where they are in terms of their maturity, what steps they need to take to get to the place where they can provide AI in the form that you're describing to augment these types of workflows.
Yeah. So this is where
That
I
was a
think
really
we
long
need.
way of asking a simple question, so I apologize.
Sure, sure.
I'm
No,
still
I
trying
think
to
I
figure
get it.
out.
If we start with telemetry and sort of sensor technology and the way it's evolved, that's probably made less of an impact. Like I said, depending on the nature of your business and the size of your business, less impact than you may imagine, because we've already had so much data that we weren't making use of. That is just really, really useful. But if you look at something like a wireless corrosion probe, right, and there's some multiple technologies that'll do that type of thing for you. It didn't exist, well, definitely not 15 years ago. You might think, oh, we're going crazy. We've got corrosion probes everywhere. There's still some practical problems with that type of a setup, and we still aren't getting the full insight. The insight from something like a corrosion probe, where it's, oh, my metal is thinning at this rate, is that you still need to correlate it to the other data. And so I always come back to the data accessibility. And accessibility, when you break it down, is really just smart data modeling. I think it's entirely a people solution in the sense that your data managers have to know where the data comes from, how it's going to be used, so they can put it in a common framework and then do appropriate governance and use that as a jumping off point. And I think that's one of the things that is kind of secret sauce of companies that do it well. I've talked to some other companies and other types of industries where they say, how are you guys not creating a big mess? And I really give a lot of credit to our data managers, because the magic of what you can do with analytics and with AI comes from the combination of the different types of data in ways that you couldn't do it before. So it's now I mentioned that depending on what kind of business, maybe things are different, because I have seen a lot of sort of startup offers for the mid-size, on natural gas liquids kind of operations, maybe some of the smaller players where they didn't have access to these platforms. They couldn't afford a lot of sensors. Now these things have become cheaper. The platforms are more portable. And I think, to your point, that has enabled a lot more. But if I think back to some of the sensor technologies that I started working with, almost 10 years ago, acoustic sensors and some of these different things where it's like, oh, gee, I can listen to my equipment get sick, and that should tell me a lot. My air cooler sounds different when it's plugged up with a bunch of cottonwood seeds. Um, I haven't seen that really develop in the way that you might expect. That's still unmined territory. There's still potential for doing that. I think part of the reason is that we're not done with what we have. And as I mentioned, you got pressures, temperatures, levels, flows. These things will flow in a particular cycle. They will sort of speak to you in ways that we're only beginning to understand, and that is really the basis for a lot of what we're doing with the AI that goes into the plan. How do you make use of all the information you have in aggregate to inform yourself about the context of what's going on? And then the next step is, okay, what do I do from now? If something's going wrong, how do I intervene to prevent that from going wrong? Or if there's an opportunity just popped up, how do I take action before that opportunity passes me by. It's a sum total of all the data that you've got.
It sounds like you're saying, I mean, just that in terms of the explanation behind the evolution of telemetry and the importance of what you have already and how you can aggregate it, right? It's
Yep.
almost like in my mind, I'm envisioning a quadrant where you have the data that you have and the data that you want, and the data that is most impactful and least impactful, and the low-hanging fruits is what you have already that is most impactful. And maybe that's where the focuses are, and because like you said, right, only recently or relatively recently has there been um, a stack or an application stack or modern data stack alongside with other analytic tools that can bring that all together for purpose, right? Like that, at least they've been around for a while, but the adoption of those types of platforms, I think,
Yeah.
help that process, right? To be able to focus on those low hanging fruits.
Yeah.
So now
It's all gotten
we kind of
easier.
covered, yeah, we covered a little
Mhm.
bit of like maybe again at 10,000 feet, how can we get there? But maybe we can share it with the group here, specific use cases that you know of or have been involved in, or we'll just keep it nebulous for the sake of disclosure, uh, that can help uh, someone in a tangible form kind of understand what the technology can do, specifically around like our topic of conversation, which is being able to augment decision making for people, right?
Right. So one of the technologies that I like to dive into is causal AI, and there's been sort of a little bit of hype around it. If you follow LinkedIn, you might have seen some posts about that. And really, what I like about causal AI is not that it's a new type of AI, but it's a repurposing of older methods, really to for a different reason. And causal AI was developed. And the reason I mention causal AI is because this is something we can take advantage of today that's developed in another industry, but that would very much apply to time series data into an operating environment. So it's developed for sociology and epidemiology, economics, and in areas where you were trying to make sense of a body of data that you collected, but didn't necessarily have the opportunity to control all the variables. In fact, maybe you controlled no variables and you're still trying to make an interpretation. So how do you filter out everything that might be affecting your data? How do you even become aware of all the factors? You're not going to get a neat line between cause and effect as as you would if you were able to perform controlled experiments. So how do you start with that, right? You can start with the data where I can see these correlations in the data, but then inevitably a person has to come in and overlay what they know. So in an operating context, if I correlate my different sensors and I'm really trying to get to cause and effect, here's where that expert comes in, or the extract from my large language model that goes in and looks at prior incidents or at the fundamentals of the way my unit operates and specifics about my equipment. And I can see patterns in the data and implications that I wasn't able to see before. So that's one way. And again, causal AI, you can also take it the other way, where I'm going to start by ingesting all my data and then ingesting everything that I know from the past, from what experts have documented, test that against data. That's sort of another way to go. But inevitably, what this type of AI does is it provides a means for you to integrate what a person knows or what they've learned and combine it with the data. And you have that balance between the knowledge and the pure machine learning aspect of it. I believe that the most effective AI combines both of those, and you benefit from the explainability, you benefit from sort of the vetting, and now you move that into real time, right? So how often can I update? How often do I need to update my analysis so that I know if my situation has changed? If I have an opportunity now for whatever reason, capacity is opened up somewhere, um, I want to be able to jump on it. And I can't ask my operators to constantly monitor these things. What I really need to do is understand the conditions under which something is possible and then alert them to it and provide distinct guidance for how to do it. So this is one of the tools that you're starting to see, one of the types of tools that you're starting to see proliferate in manufacturing execution systems, where we can be relatively prescriptive and very timely about what somebody should do and when they should do it.
So, Marty, let me ask you, without breaking any non-disclosures, is there a specific asset example that you can give where uh, maybe it's a known industry use case where causal AI has been used to support a specific type of workflow?
Oh, there's my favorite example is a Georgia Pacific paper. I think they presented at conferences. I think this is pretty well known, where they were able to diagram in a big graph or a series of graphs that they're merged, their supply chain system and their manufacturing, and you get insights like which type of paper pulp should I buy based on a number of different factors, some of which would normally talk to each other. And you get surprises like, gee, when I run this type of pulp, my reliability of my equipment goes up, and there's no other way I would have known that. Or even better, when do I go against the biases that I've had and the way I've tried to simplify? If I have a rule that says that I should never be late on a delivery of any of my contracts, what if I am? What's the penalty? And how do I optimize? Do I actually gain by breaking a rule somewhere and optimizing somewhere else? These are the types of things that start to become known once you combine all the data you have in a logical structure.
Right. Let me flip this a little bit and talk a little bit about like a top-down approach to a digital strategy around artificial intelligence. And we don't have to, that's a very broad kind of realm of exploration, but I want to speak to specifically causal AI and maybe other uh, artificial intelligent technologies like generative AI, for example, large language models. So, is there repurpose value and let's call it governance strategy that allows you to kind of plan out an approach where you can leverage some of the legwork that you just described? Because it doesn't have to be Georgia specific or otherwise, but like when you're talking about this, like I envision knowledge graphs, and I'm thinking, well, knowledge graphs are also a precursor to effective agentic frameworks that can then navigate information and kind of delegate, essentially answers or questions and answers from different trained agentic agents. And I'm thinking, well, if you did the legwork on the governance side, then these sort of technology efforts for purpose can be a lot more scalable and a lot less expensive to deploy. So I wanted to get your thoughts around that.
I think that's right. Um, you can't take too much of an ad hoc view in creating something like a graph. And just for clarity, I think of a kind of a Venn diagram between causal AI and knowledge graphs, right? Because there's a lot of causal AI technology that's not graph, and there's a lot of graph that's not causal or intended to be causal. But I really think that it's a skill we need to develop across multiple industries to create good schema in graph. And if you look at what Netflix has done, that's they're relatively fortunate with their knowledge graph, the recommender agent, that they can have something like here's an actor, here's a director, here's a movie, and then have relationships mapped in the graph. Like this director directed this movie, right? Their universe is kind of known in that sense, and it's infinitely scalable because another movie comes in, it's going to have the same data associated with it. You can incorporate it into the same graph database. Things get a little bit tougher when you're talking about the 20 or so units that a typical refinery has, five of which may be the same type, but they're designed slightly differently, right? So how do we um, create the data modeling that will help us to scale these things? This is one of the problems I think that we have in the industry. The other thing is sort of the logical joins between different types of graphs. Really, we should be able to go into any place where a person has documented knowledge. If they built a model, if they made a drawing, piping and instrumentation diagrams, these are ripe for creating graphs, and people are creating graphs from these. The trick then is to be able to combine them with these other types of knowledge structures so that you can reason through logically, right? If I open this valve, my drum heats up, and those types of things, so that I can repurpose that and I can be more predictive. even in the sense of combining more data in order for me to get into action. Let's say I wanted to make a recommendation that I need to take this equipment out of service. There's a penalty to that. So how do I capture the penalty to that? I might need to know market conditions. Might need to know the availability of workers, all these different elements of data that come into it, which can all be connected through structures that we're using. It's just sort of an expansion of that. And as you pointed out, I think was part of the question, we need to be very careful to not create a mess or to not have to start over every time we want to do that for another part of the business. Honestly, we don't know how to do that yet. That's part of our journey.
Right. Yeah. So this is the part of the session where we get a little bit more theoretical. I'll let you, maybe there'll be one more very specific question I'll ask you, but when we present this technology and kind of the theme of what we presented, we articulated something very specific, is how AI can augment human decision making, not replace human decision making. And of course, a lot of the focus, Marty, that we have in our advisory councils really is around that, the priorities and the use cases and how we can address them using artificial intelligence. And I know that you have an opinion about that and kind of why you've positioned this topic as a topic that is important, but also one that I think will persist for a very long time. The idea that AI will take over, which will be the follow-up question, is not something that's like in your frame of mind. So maybe you can share a little bit about why you believe this, so strongly about this being an important tool and something that's going to persist. For the audience, I think, both that are interested in learning your opinion, but also maybe those that are concerned with how this technology evolves into the future.
Yeah, I think what we were talking about yesterday, Conrad, that you're referring to is, will AI take over the world? Is Skynet gonna come upon us anytime soon? And I think what I told you was that I don't think so, because people are still too much involved in creating an AI. And to think that we have a lot of point intelligences that will uniformly decide anything, but including that we need to eliminate all human life, is just unlikely, because there's so much discord in the people who created those AIs. They're just not going to agree. Just like, any two LLMs will give you different answers and hallucinate in different ways. They're unlikely, in my opinion, to rise up against us in that sense. So if AI destroys the world, I believe it'll be because there's a human behind it, and there's somebody trying to take advantage of AI. You can picture, going back to the 80s in the War Games movie, where maybe you have AI control all your defense systems, and another country does that, and now the AIs are battling each other. That's probably the most likely scenario I can think of, where AI would destroy the world. But if you peel it back, it wasn't AI doing it; it was the people and their intentions and the way they wanted to deploy technology that ultimately did it. So if there's anything to fear, we probably have to fear each other more than we have to fear AI.
Right. Yeah, I told you we would get it on the record, Marty.
There you go. So if the world is destroyed by AI, you can prove that I was wrong.
Right.
Through this recording.
That's right. Yeah, we'll have it somewhere in the repository. But this will probably wind up being churned out through large language model. Here, let me take another left turn for us, non-rehearsed. So part of what, this is kind of unrelated, but I wanted to maybe run it by you. So large language models today are being used a lot for like general knowledge, aggregation and simulation. You're speaking to this almost in some form here, with delivering expert knowledge to assist and augment individuals. But I've read, like, for example, search engine approaches, basically that the modern search engine, if it doesn't evolve into something alike to a large language model, will become obsolete, because people are going to be wanting to have answer-based search versus like this search that simply provides them nebulous information, links, and sponsored ads. I think that eventually those large language models are going to be monetizing like placement of certain types of information. So you're going to be, if you sponsor a particular, tier sponsorship for pick your whatever large language model, which is say OpenAI, that you will be positioned as a priority ahead of other individuals. So if you have knowledge, that knowledge might be biased through money, which is the case in society as well, I think, right? Like, so, I mean, do you foresee a danger in that, or what is your thoughts, and what do you think is going to happen? Since we're talking about apocalyptic scenarios, let's start simple at the search engine level.
Yeah, I agree with you that ultimately what makes money will rule, at least in the big search engines, because everybody's competing for your attention, and they want it in little snippets. People don't have the time, or generally not even the attention span, to listen to an hour long podcast, right, and get into um, deep topics, or most people don't. I think generally we've seen a shift towards these very small snippets. Grab your attention, grab it again, and I think that's what we've seen sort of Google turn into, right? That's criticism, where if I pay to sponsor an ad, it's just clickbait, and if you click it, then I get paid, right, as a web browser. There's got to be something that would reverse that before anything else happens. And if you think about LLMs, I mean, how did large language models really evolve? They came from a relatively simple technology, and then some neat innovations that were put on top of that. So we used to have neural nets that were relatively shallow, and I remember working on these like in the mid 90s when I joined the company, um, and then they got deep, right? A few decades later, now we have the computational power to do layers and layers and layers. And then we got self-attention, with Google and their big paper in 2017, I think it was. It's like, okay, well, what does self-attention do? Now, if you're doing natural language, you're not just predicting the next word, you're looking at the whole sentence, the whole pattern. So I can see that sort of technology being applied and it having value, but until somebody commercializes that or has a reason or owns that, a lot of this stuff is open source, or becomes commercial, and other people will provide an open source competitor. Um, to do anything different, I think you have to change where the money flows. That's sort of my cynical view. And in the competition for attention, there has to be something superior to the clickbait that we have today in order to steer attention in that way, if that
Yeah,
makes
and I
sense.
definitely think, just intuitively, I prefer to use large language models for information. The problem is those things hallucinate, and then they give me
Yeah.
bogus links.
Yeah.
Uh, but so anyway, just to turn us back to the core
Yeah.
topic, do you foresee any of those things, or how do you foresee any of those things affecting the use of this technology for energy and utilities? Uh,
Yeah. I
Not
yeah.
to say
I
that
think
you're going to
it's
get sponsor ads when you're in the middle of doing some sort of workover on a valve or something, but what are the risks there for people looking at this tech?
yeah, I think that as you start to use technology, it becomes familiar, which can be good and bad, right? And if you see right now the proliferation of deep fakes, for example, you might say, "Oh, gee, that seems real." I'm under threat because somebody can fool me so easily. But I believe that people will start to be able to identify these types of things. And what I think about there is, if you remember the first Superman movie, where it's, "You will believe a man can fly." And back then, I remember going to the movies thinking, "Oh man, that guy's really flying." Today, it's the guy doing like this, right? And it's just not very impressive. So I think that in terms of our resistance to those types of Gen AI threats, we'll learn to spot it better, and in some ways we immunize ourselves against that. So then that helps to create that, and also the beneficial use will start to create the confidence. And really, I think that as people gain confidence and gain trust and learn to use these technologies in a more reliable way, I don't know if we'll ever get away from hallucinations entirely, right? It could be that you never want to use an LLM directly in that type, maybe you don't want to show it to your board operator like ever at all for making decisions because of liability. But there are other versions, as I mentioned earlier, other things that an LLM can do for you that do create an artifact that you can turn into a model. And I think those things will come. Eventually, we'll go to more automation. People have asked me before, why do you want a human in the loop? Why wouldn't you just go straight to automation? And really, I think it's just you have to dive in and you have to create trust. I'm reminded of a story I read in the Elon Musk biography, where when he first built his his plan. He decided he was going to make the batteries for his cars. He built it completely with robots. And after some operating, they had lots of failures of like the glue that put the batteries together, and they decided, oh, these robots just really don't know how to glue. Because from day one, they had robots, they didn't have people. So what they did was go in and rip out all the robots. There's the story goes that they just piled them up in the parking lot, all these mechanisms, and they hired people to go in and glue the batteries. And now what they've gone back and done gradually is now you understand how the people are using the technology. Now they can automate. Now they have confidence and they've learned some tricks and how to do it reliably. But I think that's generally the way this technology has to evolve. Use it to help people. People gain confidence. They're ready to do the next thing. It's also very interesting that these, the cell phone has changed everything as well. Because now when you're sitting at work, you can say, why isn't my work computer as advanced as my phone, right? And things like that. And it creates sort of the drive, the desire to go in and do a little bit more and to be able to adopt these things in the workplace, kind of grease the wheels for us a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said about the Tesla example, and how they've evolved uh, based on, I suppose, understanding the process first in an intricate level. I've seen, and we do work with organizations where they use AI not as an automation tool, but as a tool to try to understand tribal knowledge and expert knowledge better, because
Hmm.
it's not in all cases understood. And as you
Yep.
kind of define the like that case study, it makes me think like, this is maybe new digitization journeys where you're digitizing nuanced workflows in ways that you just couldn't do before well or quickly enough. And that is the journey as part of the journey of full automation, like you just described.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's really interesting. That
Exactly right.
we'll make that into another episode, Marty. Thanks.
Sure.
So I got maybe two more topics of discussion for you, and one is for the audience listening, how can they start this journey if they haven't started it already? What is the ways in which they can begin, digitization or otherwise, depending on their maturity, begin these types of projects? Can you give us, and that's not a simple answer, but maybe a 30-second or a minute soundbite on where to start, right? Because maybe is it with a use case and a problem statement? Is it with the data? And then how can you bring it all together? Like, I think from what I get, I'm just going to compliment you one more time. Like, I've seen your understanding of this tech and the digital maturity of the organizations that you work with and for. And I think like that is a function also of the framework that is built for the digital maturity of that organization, the ability to allow for innovation to flourish, to scale. There's probably layers and layers of that type of, um, I'll just call it work or expertise that has gone into uh, the organization in order for these types of technologies to be stood up. But in a 30-second soundbite, can you give some guidance to the audience looking to work with this technology? Maybe just takeaways, not necessarily the specific steps.
Yeah, I guess this is where I can plug the AI Applied Consortium, right? The right thing to do is to
This
contact
was totally not
Konrad Konarski.
intentional. I didn't plan this, and I wasn't trying to lead you down that path. But I'm glad you did that anyways. But so it doesn't have to be just the AI
Yeah,
consortium. So you can go outside the
yeah.
box.
I'm only halfway joking. You need help, right? This is a very human problem. Ultimately, technology is about people and the application of people. And if you go in and you blindly try and apply the technology, you load in your thousand variables into some predictive model and hoping something rational comes out, you're going to be disappointed. Or even if you go out and you hire 100 data scientists and they rotate around your country, around your company, and they don't really understand the domain, again, you're going to struggle. So I think it the answer is really start by going to the people, understand the workflows, understand how work gets done. What are people already trying to do, and where are the barriers? It comes very much back to behavior-driven development of product management, and back to, even like the Agile Manifesto, value relationships around along. above contracts, right? And try to relate to people and solve real problems in a real way. We have a luxury working with electrons as opposed to working in the physical world. You know, I've done huge capital projects before where you never want to recycle on your engineering because it's so expensive, especially once you start like digging up dirt. It's like, oh my God, you're never going to go back and recycle. In the digital world, you do want to be agile and go back and make sure you're solving the right problem. And so many of the mistakes that I've made, or people getting into pilot purgatory where they've started, is really just from losing touch and not understanding, at some point losing the thread. What's the problem I'm really trying to solve? I believe you need to engage your users as much as possible in your experimentation and focus on that middle stage. It's great to have consultants tell you what technology is on the horizon. I mean, it's even more awesome to have a group internally that'll do that for you. But until you connect that, if you need to work that middle ground so that you can connect those innovations to something that's real in the field. And your users will always tell you where you're going wrong. It's very humbling. And I remember the first time, you know, I set out to do this sort of this cognitive AI thing, and it's like, oh, this little startup company says this is going to be great. This exists. Let's just fund it and run with it. You take it to your users, they say, whoa, buddy, what we need is a platform to help people to communicate, for example, right? Or, you know, they kind of pour you back in the bottle, but you build that foundation and you solve real world problems, then you turn your users into champions and they'll come back and ask for more and they'll work with you and you gain credibility and then you can do your fancy AI thing that you were trying to do initially. So that is really what I think it comes down to. Go and talk to your people, understand what the problems are, and find folks who can work that middle space, who can connect the technology, understand enough about the technology, and understand enough about the business to be able to ask the really tough questions, ask the right questions.
That's perfect. Thank you, Marty. So
Sure.
we're gonna conclude our podcast with a couple of like forward-looking ideas and forward-looking information for our audience. So next week we're gonna have our very own Michael Braun on, along with a colleague of his, Rebecca, from Canopy Consulting, and they're going to cover a topic around the applications of AI for the public sector. So we've done some work with the public sector. We have a public sector advisory council that is focused on the basically breaking barriers of adoption for artificial intelligence across different use cases in the public sector. And we have this nationally recognized video analytics program that was deployed recently in the state of Georgia. And so they're going to talk about that program, and they're going to talk about more broader applications of artificial intelligence in the public sector, which I guess tangentially also includes some of the stuff that we've done recently, which is a submission of our AI policy posture, which Marty, you were a part of, that document that we had to shrink down from 100 pages to 15. So I think that also speaks a little bit to the work that we're doing more broadly outside of maybe our discussion here in energy utilities. So if you're interested in that, it's actually downloadable online through our LinkedIn at no cost. So just find it and click through, and you should be able to see it. Other than that, Marty, I'd like to have you back. We have like 50 plus speakers lined up, but I want to fit you in perhaps, you know, before the next energy utility focused symposium. So we just did one at BASF, which I know you missed, but you know, you've been on most of the other ones, so I'm not keeping attendance. But I think maybe to have you on before that symposium and have you speak a little bit more specific on different topics, depending on, you know, maybe our audience feedback. That would be definitely beneficial. And I know, Marty, that you are going to be putting out some sort of blog that we're going to post. And I want to put you on the spot, so we don't have to talk about the topic or anything. But I think part of the lead-in for this session was to promote that once it does come out. And I think we're going to be posting it similarly to what we did with all the other document sources that we have, through our LinkedIn channel, and it'll be linkable through that. Likely also through the LinkedIn article sections that we have yet to do anything with, but I think we're going to be doing that with your blog. I'm
Awesome.
assuming that's still part of your plan, because I made the assumption based on our discussion.
I already sent you some drafts, so I think you kind of
Oh, okay.
see what
Great.
I have.
So I
It
think this
really
is a
is a
really nice lead-in.
deconstruction. Sure, the same topics that I'll dive into in a little bit more detail, and try to put
Right.
some nuggets of thought for discussion out there a little bit at a time.
Right. Perfect. Perfect. So Marty, thank you for joining me today. I look forward to having you on again. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And stay tuned for the next session, which will be coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to that one. Thanks, Konrad. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Right, we're off.